Do any of you keep a diary? I do. Here's mine. I like to write down all of the things that happened during the day, like what I've done and who I saw. Sometimes it's fun to look at an old diary and read about what I was doing 5 or even 10 years ago. A diary is also a good place to record special memories, and so I don't forget them. Most diaries are quite personal things, and only I, or maybe 1 or 2 special people, would be able to get to read it. In today's story, we meet a man who, many years before, also wrote a diary, a special diary that is read by thousands of people every day as part of the Bible. Let's open the book and read John's story. What shall we do? Let's open the book.
John was getting old. His hair was grey, and in the evenings he found it hard to see what he had written. But he was determined to finish his book about Jesus. He spent long hours gathering all his memories together. He was pleased with the way it had turned out, and now it was nearly finished. This final part was all about the last week John had spent with Jesus, and it was important that he wrote down exactly what had happened, so that in years to come, anyone who read his book would know that these things really had happened. Demetrius, one of his brightest students, brought John his evening drink.
Have you nearly finished?
Almost. Would you like to see? Oh.
Demetrius picked up the parchment from John's desk and began to read. Near the cross, the women watched and waited. During these last 3 years, they had fed him and cared for him, and now they stood, huddled together, frightened and upset. What were they to do? What would happen after Jesus was dead? Jesus looked down and saw his mother standing there. He searched the faces in the crowd, and then, as if he had read their minds, he called out to her,
"Dear woman, here is your son."
Mary didn't understand what he was saying. Then she looked up and saw John, Jesus' dear friend, standing nearby. As she looked at him, she heard Jesus say to John,
"Here is your mother."
John moved over to Mary and put his arm around her shoulder, as together they watched and waited. A little while later, Jesus called out,
"It is finished."
Then he bowed his head and died. One by one, John, Mary, and the women left. Jesus' body was taken down from the cross. and placed in an empty tomb in a nearby garden. Two days later, John was sitting quietly with his friend Peter when the women came running up.
The tomb is empty.
Panted Mary Magdalene.
They've taken him away.
Where they've put him?
Peter and John leaped to their feet, looked at each other, and ran as fast as they could to the tomb. John got there first. He always did. John peered nervously into the tomb. It was gloomy inside, but he could see enough to tell that Jesus' body had gone. Just as he was trying to work out what had happened, Peter arrived, puffing and panting. He pushed past John, stumbled into the tomb, and then stopped and stared. John crept in behind him. They looked around. They blinked their eyes, got used to the gloom. All that was left was a pile of burial linen and a single white cloth folded up on one side by itself. John looked and smiled.
Oh, I wonder.
He thought to himself. That evening, one by one, Jesus' friends arrived at the meeting room. Once they were all safely inside, they locked the doors, frightened that the soldiers would arrest them too. The news of the empty tomb had travelled fast. What did it mean? What had happened to Jesus? Mary Magdalene was convinced that she had seen Jesus. She claimed that he was alive and that she had actually spoken to him. No one knew what to believe. Then suddenly, without any warning, Jesus was there, standing among them, smiling and reaching out his hands.
Peace be with you.
The room fell silent. They stared in amazement. Was it really true? Were their eyes playing tricks? Was this really Jesus standing right in front of them? They looked at one another. First one smiled, then another. Then they burst out laughing and cheering.
Oh, dearie me.
It's him.
They were overjoyed when they saw the Lord.
Is that how it really happened?
Yes, yes.
And Mary, Jesus' mother, stayed with you after that?
Yes, she did. She did.
John nodded again and smiled as he remembered the smell of Mary's cooking and the taste of her matzah bread.
And the tomb really was empty?
Yes, empty.
And you really did see him in the meeting room.
So many questions. Yes, yes, and yes. All these things really did happen, just as I've written.
What an amazing story.
And John smiled, happy that the amazing story of Jesus and his friends would be read for many years to come.
John wrote down all the things that happened when he was with Jesus. It's one of the most important books of the Bible. He wanted to share his memories with people like you and me. Close your eyes for a moment and think about something important that has happened to you, something you want to share with your friends. Let's just think for a moment. Now I'm going to say a prayer. And if you want to make it your prayer, say Amen at the end after me. Dear God, thank you that John wrote down all the things that he could remember about his time with Jesus. Thank you that we can still read that today. Amen.